So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the Detroit Lions are a very well-constructed team. They're a team that have expectations of going to the playoffs, expectations of winning the NFC North, expectations of hosting and winning playoff games in 2023, but they're far from a perfect football team, right? They still have holes on their roster. They still have positions that are weaker than others, still have positions that, stacking up against the league, aren't going to be at the top of the NFL's priority list. And today we're going to talk about players that could fix that. We're going to talk about upcoming free agents, players that haven't been signed to teams just yet that could potentially come into the Detroit Lions, have a positive impact, and address positional needs, as well as improving the roster overall before the 2023 season gets underway. So with all that being said, let's get right into taking a look at the three free agents that are still on the market that the Lions could potentially have their eyes on as future signings in this year. Now, I think there's three players that really stand out in this market, right? There are three players that just make a lot of sense for what the Lions are going to need, right? I would say with the suspension of Jameson Williams and the cutting of both Quintez Cephas as well as the other wide receiver that got caught gambling, I think wide receiver is a very real need for the Detroit Lions, right? A need, especially as a big body X wide receiver, the Lions currently don't have on the roster for this year, nor do they have on the roster for the future, unless you truly believe that Antoine Green or one of the UDFA players is going to be that number one X wide receiver for 5 to 10 seasons for the Detroit Lions, right? Kenny Golladay, of course, has the Detroit Lions connection, played very well for the Detroit Lions when he was here, and was a fan favorite before he ended up signing a mega contract with the New York Giants. Now, Frank Clark is a former Michigan Wolverine, a pass rusher most recently of the Kansas City Chiefs, who has never really been a big numbers player, but has always really come alive in the playoffs and has always been a big playmaker in key situations. And with the Lions pass rushing unit kind of having a lot of youth players, a veteran might not be the worst idea for them to bring in and potentially mentor some of the young players like Aiden Hutchinson, James Houston, or some of the other young pass rushers the Lions have drafted over the last couple of years. And then, of course, you have Marcus Peters, most recently of the Baltimore Ravens, but drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs as a Washington Husky. He is a player that has been a turnover machine for his entire career, has been a cornerback one multiple times throughout his NFL career, and of course is a former All-Pro player. And for a secondary that was really, really struggling a season ago, and for a secondary that doesn't have a truly lockdown cornerback one, Marcus Peters, a veteran former number one cornerback, could potentially be an answer for the Detroit Lions as well. Now, I want to start off more in depth with Kenny Golladay, as Kenny Golladay is kind of, I think, a very obvious choice for people, but isn't necessarily maybe the best choice for the Detroit Lions. Now, taking a look at Kenny Golladay as a wide receiver, right? 6'4", 213 pounds, typical X wide receiver build. Now, he doesn't create a ton of separation, but I think he creates just as much separation, if not more, than what Marvin Jones did, more than, even some guys like DJ Chark, who deceptively didn't have very good separation numbers a season ago. Kenny Golladay has averaged 16.2 yards per reception in his career, and with the Detroit Lions was one of just a few players in franchise history to have back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons. Now, of course, Kenny Golladay did have a very poor stint with the New York Giants, right? He didn't put up very big numbers, never really was a big playmaker on the New York Giants. And I think some of that is to do with him, but I think some of it is to do with the scheme that he went into. Some of it is to do with the Joe Judge offense, and some of it is to do genuinely with Daniel Jones, right? Daniel Jones, I'm not going to say is a poor quarterback, but isn't a quarterback that would let a guy like Kenny Golladay thrive. Is not a guy that would let Kenny Golladay succeed, even with the new offense of Brian Daboll, right? He needs guys that create separation. He needs guys that are going to get you space and leave a little bit of room for error, whereas Kenny Golladay doesn't necessarily create that separation, is more of a jump ball guy, is more of a big body, out muscle you to the football, but I think still can stretch the field a little bit. And of course, as a wide receiving group like the Detroit Lions that doesn't have an X wide receiver, bringing in a still relatively young Kenny Galladay that's 6'4", 213, and can play that X wide receiver and has shown to be a 1,000-yard receiver in the past, I think it makes a lot of sense for the Detroit Lions to go out and get Kenny Galladay. Again, a 16.2 yards per reception in his career, most of that coming with the Detroit Lions. And I think that there is a path for Kenny Galladay on this roster, right? Taking a look at what he did with the New York Giants and taking a look at the Detroit Lions wide receiving core right now, obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to take a lot of the targets. Marvin Jones, I think, is going to have a healthy target share. You have Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond, both players that have played in starting roles this past season and were really good. You have Tom Kennedy, who was a really good preseason wide receiver and could still make the roster as well. You have Trinity Benson, you have Antoine Green, you have Maurice Alexander, you have Keaton Thompson, Chase Cota, Dylan Drummond. All three of those are UDFA players that could have a role. And then, of course, you go through, you have Brock Wright, Sam Laporta, and James Mitchell, three pass catchers that have joined the team in the last couple of seasons and have really been good role players for what they've been asked to do. And I think Kenny Galladay, for that reason, might not have the best role for the Detroit Lions. He might not be the best fit for the Lions, as they do kind of have a deep wide receiving core. However, with the suspension of Jameson Williams, I think that the Detroit Lions could potentially look to bring back Kenny Galladay. Again, he would be the biggest and heaviest wide receiver on the field. He would be an incredible blocker. I know that his size and strength leads him to be a very good blocker, and we saw that even on the New York Giants when he wasn't getting the football in his hands. Right. And coming back to a more positive culture, right? The Giants had one this past season, but before that, their culture wasn't the best. Coming back to a quarterback that I think would allow him to succeed a little bit more. Obviously, Goff also likes the separators, but a red zone threat in Kenny Galladay might not be the worst thing in the world. And if you give Kenny Galladay a league minimum, a veteran minimum player to come in, I think he could genuinely push Josh Reynolds. I think he would genuinely push even Tom Kennedy for that last spot on the roster. And yeah, he might not bring, special teams versatility, but that's why you have Khalif Raymond, right? He might not bring slot versatility, but that's why you have Khalif Raymond, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and potentially even Marvin Jones, right? He might not be the most versatile player, might not be a special teams ace or anything like that, but could bring you a lot of really good things, and I think could still be a valuable asset for the correct price. And if nothing else, come in and give him a chance to prove himself in training camp and potentially return to the team that drafted him. Now, I think there's one problem with this, and that being the Detroit Lions UDFA class. Both Chase Cota and Keaton Thompson are UDFAs from Oregon and Virginia, respectively, who have that size, right? Keaton Thompson, 6'4", 212. Chase Cota, 6'3", 209. That is the typical build the Detroit Lions like in their wide receiver. It's a very Tyrell Williams build. It's a very DJ Chark-esque build. And Kenny Galladay also follows that mold, which I think puts a little bit bigger of a target on his back. But I think with all the big receivers that they've brought in over the last couple of years and with all the big wide receivers they brought in through UDFA, I think that they're going to try to roll with those players, roll with the younger players, roll with, some of the cheaper players. And especially if Kenny Galladay wants a little bit more money for what he's done in the past, I think that going with the UDFA option could potentially be more financially sound than going with an NFL veteran and potentially having to pay more money for less production. Now, moving on to Frank Clark. Frank Clark last season had 5 sacks for the Chiefs, 8 tackles for losses, a former 3-time Pro Bowler, and is known for his playoff success. However, he's never had a massive season in the regular season. And I think that's what the Lions are really going to look at, right? Yes, he's a big playoff performer. Yes, he shows up in big moments. Yes, he shows up in big games. But how much is that going to help the Detroit Lions right now with an already very crowded running or with an already very crowded edge rushing room? How much is Frank Clark going to play? Is he going to play over Aiden Hutchinson? Is he going to play over John Kaminsky? Is he going to play over Josh Pascal or James Houston or the Okwara brothers or Charles Harris, right? There's 7 guys there right now competing for those spots. And I really don't think that Frank Clark is going to be the guy that does that and makes the roster, because honestly, if he was signed to the roster today, I don't know if he would make it, right? Taking a look at the edge rushers on this team, Aiden Hutchinson is a lock. James Houston is a lock. Romeo Okwara is a lock. I wouldn't say Julian is a lock, but I think he's a player that the Lions really like. Kaminsky's a lock. Harris is a lock, as well as Josh Pascal. So that's 7 edge rushers right there that are going to be better and probably impact the team more than an older veteran like like Frank Clark, right? Hutchinson, Okwara, Kaminsky, Harris, Pascal all have interior versatility. Houston has kind of a more athletic build. Same thing with Okwara. They can drop into coverage if they need. They can be kind of the chess pieces on the defense. And none of them are going to have to come in and learn the system like Frank Clark is going to do. So if you want to make the argument that, yeah, he's big in big moments, yeah, he's big in big plays, and he's big in playoff games, then wait until you get to the playoffs, right? Wait until, unfortunately, an injury probably arises, right? Wait till one of the Okwara brothers likely gets hurt again, or wait till one of your edge rushers gets struck with an injury before the playoffs and have that be a backup plan. Have that be a security blanket, right? Oh, James Harris or Charles Harris goes down right before the playoffs. Okay, we'll bring in Frank Clark. Oh, Romeo Okwara goes down before the playoffs, unfortunately. Okay, that really stinks. He's hopefully having a really good season, but we could bring in Frank Clark. I don't think there's room for him right now on the roster, and I honestly don't think he would beat out any of the 7 players that are currently listed at the edge rushing position. Now, the last player I want to talk about is Marcus Peters, a 3-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time All-Pro, 32 interceptions in his career, and a true boundary cornerback. However, he has not been that All-Pro in the last couple of seasons. He started his career incredibly. Started his career as a turnover machine, incredibly cocky, incredibly just built very well to be a cornerback in the NFL. But in recent years, he really hasn't been the shutdown cornerback that he was to start his NFL career. Last year, allowed 771 yards and 7 touchdowns. That is an absurd number. That is worse than Jeff Okudah numbers. That is worse than Amani Oruwariye was on pace to give up. Would have made him statistically the worst cornerback on the 29th ranked pass defense a season ago. I get the idea, and I've seen a lot of people say, oh, Marcus Peters could be a really good option for the Detroit Lions. He has the accolades. He is the veteran. He is the pure boundary cornerback that you'd be looking for. But at the same time, why bring in a player that really hasn't shown the ability to do it over the last couple of years? Why bring in a player that was genuinely a liability in coverage last season when you have, Cam Sutton, who's young and is playing very well. You have Emmanuel Mosley, who's young and playing very well in their career. You have Jerry Jacobs, who's young, playing very well. And your cornerback room right now might not have an alpha, might not have an elite playmaker, but what they do have are young players entering their prime, playing really good football. And I think that's exactly what the Detroit Lions are going to need. Now, with that being said, I don't know if the Detroit Lions are in a position to add players right now, right? All 3 of these players on paper makes sense for Detroit, right? The boundary X wide receiver that's had back-to-back 1,000-yard receivers. The former all-pro cornerback that is a turnover machine throughout his career and has been a lockdown cornerback for most of it. The playoff performing edge rusher that could help push you over the top, push you to the playoffs. And once you get there, that's when he really turns on the jets and really becomes an alpha pass rusher. But I don't think those are things that the Lions necessarily need, right? Their biggest needs right now, I'd say, are interior defensive linemen, assuming that Levi isn't going to be fully healthy, and potentially more depth and potentially an alpha cornerback, but those guys aren't available anymore, right? They don't need an alpha pass rusher. And even if they did, that guy doesn't exist in free agency, right? Yes, they could use a true number 1 alpha dog cornerback, but that player doesn't exist anymore in the free agency market, right? They need a top tier defensive tackle. That player doesn't exist anymore in the free agency market. So I think the most likely player for them to sign would be Kenny Golladay. I think it makes the most sense from a positional need standpoint and a value standpoint. But even then, I don't think that they're going to do it. I don't think he's a wide receiver that would help Jared Goff succeed. And I don't think he's the kind of guy that can stretch the field like DJ Chark. I don't think he can stretch the field like Jameson Williams. And he would be a very different replacement and to force the Detroit Lions to change their style of play after 6 weeks because they're getting back Jameson Williams. So I think all 3 of these players are unlikely to sign. If they were to sign a single player, I think Kenny Golladay makes the most sense. A big body, X-wide receiver, biggest position of need left that can actually physically be addressed in free agency, as well as a player with, I think, high enough upside to give a league minimum contract. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about the free agency market. Who would you want the Detroit Lions to sign, if anybody? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the content, please make sure you go down below, subscribe, and like the video. It helps us out a ton. And make sure you hit the bell notification so that you never miss an upload. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions!